What's up, Simonics, and welcome back to the second part of our RxJS adventures. Today we will dive into more operators, we will dive into subjects, behavior subjects, replay subjects, into multicasting, so a bit more advanced topics. If you haven't seen the first video, I definitely recommend it. Check it out, link below the video. Also the video on promises world observables, so you can finally feel confident about all these things in your application. Of course, if you're not yet a member of the Ionic Academy, also make sure to check it out, ionicacademy.com. And now let's dive into a few more operators today. Alright, here we are back in our RxJS adventure application. In the last video, we took a look at creation, combination, transformation, and filtering. If you haven't watched the video, I definitely recommend it. Check out link below the video. And this time we gonna continue with utility. So let's start with something super easy, and that is tab. Tab, I think in the past it was also called do. I don't know if do is still working? No, I don't think so. So it's called tab. Just remember tab. And it's basically just tapping into the result and doing something without transforming the value, without returning anything specific. Tab is really just a little step on your way inside the pipe log. You can use it if you want to debug to just put a console log in here, or perhaps more helpful would be like setting a local value, this.foo equals data. Without any real side effect. You can then cache the result, so you don't need a map block because you don't want to transform the data or change it. You just want to work with the data. So that's maybe why it's called do something in the past, and now it's called tab. That is an utility you should definitely have in your tool belt. Next one is finalize. Finalize is actually pretty helpful. If, for example, you're displaying a loading indicator, then you could hide it within the finalize block. Let's take the finalize example and call it. So finalize, and let's take a look. The call completes quite fast in our example application. But we can see once it's done, it brings up this little toast at the bottom. It has finished, although we have an error in here. So that's actually pretty nice. I wasn't sure if it would still finish. If you have, for example, a connection to a Firebase collection or any real-time data, then finalize wouldn't be called until the observable is finished. In that case, you might have to add something like the take operator that we've seen before. So you only take one result, but usually if you just call your own API, finalize will be called after that call. So finalize happens at the end, and what we can see from the log is also that we first see the real log from the subscribe log, and then we got the I have finished. So although this is inside the pipe log, it is actually triggered after this block, after the subscribe block is executed. So finalize example is what we see first, and then we see I have finished a bit later. Next utility that I actually haven't used a lot, I think. There might be times when this is helpful, especially if you prefer promises, and that is to promise. What this does, it's pretty easy. This part is an observable, and if you call .toPromise, it becomes a promise. Now, how can we check this out? Just type this.promise example, and then we will see we don't get the options for subscribe or pipe, we only get the classic promise option, catch finally. Then we would really get the same result in here, so we can put a log promise example result, and it would basically look completely the same within our application. So we're making an HTTP request, it is an observable, but since we call to promise, we change this a bit, and then we get the same result. Really, no big deal. Perhaps there are other scenarios where you prefer promises, then to promise might be helpful. Next block is the error handling. Error handling is pretty important, and you can do this right within your pipe log. For example, the first one, catch error. I made an HTTP call to something that's wrong, and then we can easily catch the error. Let's call this function up here in our constructor, just like we did with all the other things. So there we go, catch example. And then let's see what's happening. So we see first the failed HTTP request, and then we see catch example, the block in our subscribe block. And within the catch error, you need to return an observable once again. So we just return off, there was an error. You could also call throw error at that point. Let's try if that also works. Throw error. Actually don't know if that works. Let's see. In that case, I think we're not even hitting our subscribe block, and we just get, we just get this thrown error up here. But it's a nice place to perform any kind of, perhaps showing an alert or something like this, that your call failed. Or you can also use this in combination with retry. Retry is really a powerful feature of observables, and you could just have it like this. So we're using once again the failed URL, and we add retry 2. As a result, what happens is, you can already think about what happens. We make the HTTP call once, and then we will retry it 2 times. So that means we have the initial failed, and then we got 2 more failed. And in the end, we got the catch error, which still shows our toast and throws this error. So with retry, you can make sure that perhaps after a specific time as well, where can we add the timeout? I think at some place we can add this. With retry, you can basically retry the call. Can be really helpful. You should know about retry as well. Now we get into 2 more topics, and this video is likely a bit shorter than the first one, but this will also take more time. That is multicasting. This was a different section within Learn RxJS right here. And what I wanted to show you is actually the share replay option. This is something pretty interesting in terms of caching or holding data. Let's look at this example. We have a variable here, and we add the HTTP call and the pipe block with share reply. Now, usually, if we call this function all the time, we would make multiple HTTP requests to people 1. But if we now use our shared data, which is an observable, we can see something interesting. And let me show you this. It's better if we see this in action. Let's comment this out, and I'm prepared something. So what I prepared is we immediately subscribe to the share reply. Then we got result 1, result 2, and 3. This happens after 1 second, and this after 2 seconds. So let's see what's going on. And we're gonna make this a bit bigger for our case. So we get the result once, twice, 3rd time. The interesting part is now happening within the network tab. Let's refresh it and see it again. And we see we only make 1 call. So these are the 300, that's something different. We really just make it 1 time. If within our share reply, we would use it like this, and we would directly return the actually new observable, what we would see in here is that we make 1, 2, 3 times the same HTTP call. The result would basically be the same, but with share reply, we can share the latest result of that observable. And that means you could easily cache your result directly in this variable. This is really helpful for HTTP calls where you just need the result once, and then you don't really need the latest value all the time, and you can save a lot of bandwidth by just keeping it in with the share reply to prevent any additional HTTP requests. Really important construct that you should know about. And the last area we want to take a look at is subjects. We touch this usually when we use some kind of authentication. Because with authentication, I usually use a behavior subject that we will come to in the next step, but we will start with a basic subject. So as we can see here, a subject is a special type of observable which shares a single execution path among observers. It's basically, as the docs say, a special observable that you can create. And there are different categories that you can use. We want to look at, I think, 3 of them. All right. So subject is the basic class. You can create a subject like this. You don't need any additional value, and with next you can emit new values to the subject. That works for all the other subjects that we will take a look at as well. Now you can subscribe to the subject. Do I have some? Well, not really. Well, let's just do a new block. This dot my subject subscribe. And then we see my subject result. So let's see what the result looks like now. We initialize it without a value. So that means when we subscribe, there's no real value. And then we at some point call next. Maybe we should also call a function. This dot subject example. We don't need to subscribe. This will just after 1 second emit the 1 and then the 42. My subject 1, my subject 42. It's a really easy way to broadcast events across your application, since with Ionic the events API was deprecated with version 4 or 5, something like this. And with subject, you can keep a subject in your service. Whenever there's a new value or event or anything, you can just emit a new value calling next on your subject, and anyone who subscribed will get that new value. The construct of subject is really important and can be very helpful in some situations. Now, the behavior subject is a tiny bit different, as you can or you have to initialize it with a value. That means if we now subscribe to my behavior subject instead of the subject, and we call the behavior subject example, what we would see is that we initially get automatically the null value. And we use this in the past for our authentication, so null, and then we got the 1 and the 2 from there on. It's basically the same like the default subject. We used this with authentication. In the beginning, you set the behavior subject for user data to null. Then you try to load the data from local storage, Ionic storage, whatever it might be, and then you emit the new value to the behavior subject. And if you combine this with a guard, you can easily filter out the initial null value and wait for the real first value that comes to the behavior subject. You can use it, of course, for many other cases as well, but this is also something next to the subject you should understand. It's just a specific type of subject. And then there's also async subject. We don't cover that, as I don't found it too helpful in the past, but also replace subject can be interesting, because to replace subject, we can pass a buffer size, and that means how many of the last values should be buffered within the subject. We have basically the same setup like before, but let's see how this works up here. We're gonna comment this one out. Promise example, no, that is done. But we have here a replace subject. So I subscribe, then I call the replace subject, and after 3 seconds I also subscribe again to the replace subject. Let's see the different results in action. I don't know why this is so slow now. Okay, so replace subject 1, 42, and then delayed, we immediately get both values. That means if you have broadcasted any values to your replace subject and you have a specific buffer size like 2, 3, 10, the replace subject will actually store those values internally. And if at a later point someone subscribed to the replace subject, all values will be automatically emitted. So this one, this subscriber was a bit late to the party, but he anyway got all the values. We could add more blocks. So after 2.5 seconds, we add 45. No, that is a bit too long. Because we only have the buffer size 2 right now, we would still just get the 2 latest values, which means 42 and 45. If you would increase the buffer size to 3, the late subscriber to the to the subject would actually get all the values. So 1, 42, 45. That is a replace subject. Another different type of subject can be handy in some situations. And I think that brings us already to the end. Was already long enough once again. I hope you once again enjoyed our adventure in the RxJS world. Alright, that's it for the second part of our RxJS adventure. By now we've seen like 15 or 20 operators, and I hope you feel a bit better about them. You understand how you can use them in your code, why they can be helpful, or how they can be applied in certain situations. Once again, these are not all the operators. Check out everything on the page, learn RxJS, or just look them up somewhere else in the documentation. And of course, I also make a lot of mistakes still, and I'm learning more about RxJS all the time. So really just try to use 1, 2, 3 new operators at a time. Don't get overwhelmed by everything that you could do and that you're missing out. You can always achieve it with a different way. Some operators are mostly the same like others, as we've seen in the first video. The subjects are just a tiny bit different. So really just try and play around with the different concepts that you've seen in this video, and think about cases where this could be applied in your own application. I hope you enjoyed this little series. If there's anything else that you want to see about observables or promises or RxJS, leave a comment below, and of course like the video and subscribe to the channel for more Ionic, Angular and web development videos in the future. Have a great week with all those new operators, and I will catch you of course next week like always. So happy coding, Simon.